Welcome to the Spiritually United Paradox Literary Language of the Heart speaker gathering. All of our speakers are shared on our WhatsApp audio groups and our speaker channels. The links will be dropped in the chat. If you're listening to this recording and need help, we have a way out that works. Please reach out and send us an email at connect@sipx.world and the crew will reach out and get back to you. First up, we'll be reading a section of the Big Book. Week to week, we start from the Doctor's Opinion to page 1 to 164. And today we're continuing with the section of the Big Book, XXV. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning the possible means of recovering. As rehabilitation, he commenced to present his concepts to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had completely failed. These facts appear to be extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of the rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new approach in the annals of alcoholism. These men may have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. And with that said, we've invited Stephen R. from Austin, Texas to share a message of depth and weight from the heart and on the section of the Big Book that's just been read. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Joey, for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. I know it's the middle of the day here in Austin, Texas, and I would be sorely amiss if I tried to figure out what time you all are in, but it's an honor to be here. The power of God separated me from cocaine and alcohol on January 7th of 2008, and I'm as grateful as I know how to be for that fact today. What I can tell you is that I do have a home group here in Austin, Texas. That home group is the Main Object Group. We meet Thursday nights at 7 p.m. and we study the steps out of the Big Book. We ask for people to bring their current experience with the steps, and the group does a really good job at staying in the literature and talking about personal experience as it pertains to the program of recovery that's clearly outlined in the textbook, A Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so if for some reason y'all are ever in Texas and you're ever in Austin on a Thursday night, we would love to have you come by and study the steps with us. It takes about 12 weeks for us to go through a body of step work, and we take an individual from the group and they take us through the steps. So it's a pretty cool experience. The group has grown over the past year. I do have a sponsor. My sponsor is a guy by the name of Chad Payne. His home group is the Rule 62 group in New Jersey, and also the Wednesday online primary purpose meeting, which maybe some of y'all have joined here and there over time. It's gotten to be kind of a worldwide phenomenon where people from all around tune in. So another thing I can tell you is that God has seen fit to send me great teachers, men who I looked up to, and men who were just, at one point, they were just one man with a book in their hand. They showed me how to work this program from a place of demonstration. And they really showed me how to make this a way of life. And it turns out this program contained in our book really is a design for living that works in rough going. And I know there's a later part in the book that talks about I cannot and should never outgrow this way of life. I need to work a program that allows for limitless expansion. And as far as I can tell, what we read earlier in the meeting, this was the something that I had in common with one of our founders right off the bat. I myself ended up in a treatment facility three different times before the message that was effectively carried to me out of the Big Book really sunk in to this keen alcoholic mind, or so I like to think. And really what I loved about this passage is that the new light that entered into the dark world of the alcoholic didn't happen until Bill met Dr. Bob. Bill worked hard for about 6 months. We would consider this the very beginning of the flying blind period. But it was a theory, right? Bill Wilson had a theory that an alcoholic could help another alcoholic or addict as no other alcoholic addict could. And this sudden realization that in order to save himself in Akron with this failed business deal, and I love the language of our book, it's just on our destiny hangs on such a slender thread. I've always thought, what if the business deal had gone off in Akron? What if everything went exactly according to plan? Would we be here? A question that only God can answer. But thankfully, as we know, the business deal did not go off. And this sudden realization in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. And I know sometimes, depending on what meetings you're going to, you hear that this is a program of suggestion, this, that, and the other. But my book makes it clear there's things I must do. I must be willing to grow spiritually. I must be willing to make my amends. I must be willing to be honest and thorough in my fourth and fifth step. I must be willing to seek a relationship with God on a daily basis in steps 10 and 11. And then I must carry the message to the sick and suffering alcoholic and addict and be on the front lines. And at the heart of that, though, is really the identification. And sometimes you'll hear about identification being this, that, and the other. I looked in this book, I've studied it for the past 17 years, and what I know about identification is this. My identification came in the series of an absolute total destruction, the hopelessness that I was being given at the hands of alcohol and cocaine. Total surrender and complete defeat. So in other words, when I identified with my sponsor, there was no good news in step one. And maybe most of us can remember that fateful day or afternoon or evening when we sat down and we finally understood the absolute hopelessness of our condition, the utter inability to ever leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish, the utter inability to stop and stay stopped on our own power. This was deflation at depth. And I love that language that Bill used, deflations at depth. And, later on, Bill wrote in AA Comes of Age, he talked about this conversation he had with Silkworth. And it's such a beautiful quote. I'm going to quote him as best I can. He said, Dr. Silkworth's medical estimate of the hopelessness of alcoholism and addiction, the physical allergy coupled with the mental obsession, was the black soil, sorry, that he later showed us how to till, out of which that black soil, every spiritual experience in our fellowship has flowered. So the way I read it is that Dr. Silkworth was reminding Bill, you know what, buddy? We're going to have to talk to these people about the hopelessness of their condition. We're going to have to talk to them about the problem before they might become a little bit interested in this spiritual stuff that you've been out trying to sell for 6 months, this white light spiritual experience that you had in Towns Hospital. These guys aren't responding to this stuff. So Dr. Silkworth, the little doctor that loved drunks, Bill credited him as being a founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's nothing short of a miracle in this first letter that he writes, because what Silkworth is about to do, he's about to say to the world, those alcoholics and addicts that you haven't been trusting, they've been lying, cheating, and stealing their way through your life. They've been looking you in the face and telling you we're going to stop and we're never doing this again. Those people that have ruined your trust, that have been like a tornado roaring through your life. He's about to give us the biggest endorsement that anyone could possibly have ever asked. He's about to say that you may rely absolutely on anything these men and women say about themselves. Wow, that's a powerful statement. The patient becomes the doctor. One of the first illnesses that I know of where we get to diagnose ourselves. And that's the importance of the identification. Sit knee to knee with another alcoholic or another addict. Page 18 goes on and gives us all these really cool classifications of what it means to be a recovered member of this program. And the first thing it is that we've got to know we've had the same problem, right? I read in the second appendix, I love this line. They said, Dr. Bob was painfully aware that he was somehow abnormal, or I think it's in A Vision for You. But Dr. Bob did not know what it meant to be alcoholic. And nor did I. Coming into my third treatment center, I did really not know what it meant to be alcoholic. And that having had the same difficulty, having found the solution, being properly armed with the facts about ourselves, that's the connectivity that we're looking for, right? I don't know, maybe like many of y'all, I had trouble talking truthfully to psychologists and psychiatrists and my parents and the teachers and the cops and the counselors and I look back and there was really well-intentioned people with a lot of letters behind their name, and they wanted nothing but the best for me. And so there's no, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. I'm simply saying we were not speaking the same language. They were not talking to me out of the language of the heart. And when I look in A Vision for You, what I find is that there's three languages of the big book, in my opinion. There's the language of knowledge, there's the language of experience, and then there's the language of the heart, right? That Bill talked about. When you sit down with another addict and you start talking about the insanity of the thought that precedes the first hit or the first drink, and they're sitting there going like, "Man, I've thought that way," and then you tell them about that insatiable thing that happens when we put just one line of cocaine in our body, when we take just one drink of alcohol, and I've got no ability to control the amount when I start, and no real ability to tell you when it's going to stop. And you start seeing the light come on in their eyes, and you're witnessing something special. You're witnessing the language of the heart, this passing of spirit to spirit, right? This connectivity. And when you look at it, sometimes I get a little caught up in this too. Maybe you guys hear about this sometimes, but sometimes I'm sitting down in a meeting and I'm talking about the work, got to do the work, got to do the work. But I've started to think a little bit differently around that. And to me now, I find that all throughout the book, even in this first letter that the doctor writes to us here, is that the work really is helping others. I mean, truly, and most importantly, steps 1 through 9, what we're trying to do there is we're trying to clear a channel. I'm trying to remove what's blocking me off from the power and from other people. I'm trying to get free from the delusion and the selfishness and self-centeredness and the dishonesty and the deceit in which I live in. Looking at my stage characters in the 5th step. And then I'm taking a laundry list out and I'm looking at all these character defects. And I've got this list of people who it turns out I need to go make amends to if I want to stay sober. I come from a lineage of men far greater than myself. And one of the words they really stuck upon was in the 8th step. It says, "To them all." And I had a grant sponsor man by the name of Mark Houston, and we were sitting around at a table one night, and it was kind of around the time we all kind of met him, and we all thought he was going to, rivet us with some wild explanation of maybe the 1st step or the 3rd step or the 5th step. And I remember he sat back in his chair, closed his eyes, crossed his arms, and he said, "I sense that there's a significant experience for every man in this room with undone amends." And we were going like, "What? I'm sorry, what did you say?" Because I think a lot of us really were just awake right then and there to, whoa, wait a minute, Mark. We kind of stopped when we were halfway through, and we've been amazed ever since. We've been amazed at the things that God has given to us as a result of just making half these amends. And so, without fail, most of us came out of that exercise with Mark Houston. I remember Charlie Parker, my sponsor at the time, came out with 42 names that he still owed amends to. So there's a really significant experience, I think, for everyone in undone amends, and there certainly was for me. And so, by the time I've cleared the channel and I've tried to remove what's blocking me off, now I'm walking into this whole different world, right? Step 10. This is the awakening of the spirit. Right now we're talking about new language that isn't necessarily understood from the cognitive mind, but more so understood from growing in understanding and effectiveness of what? Well, I love the name of this meeting. I mean, when you look at the language in step 10, it's like we got 4 things we're looking for, and we got 4 things we're going to do about it. And it turns out that it's almost a revisitation of, well, guess what? The root of my problem, still lack of power, still selfishness and self-centeredness. And I have a dilemma, right? I'm walking into this world of the spirit. I've been awakened. I've tried to clear the channel as best I can. And now I'm told, oh, guess what? This process that you just went through, this course of action that you took 4 through 9, that needs to continue for a lifetime. This is the course of action that puts me in the position to keep close to God and perform his work well. And as I've seen throughout the book, it's when I'm performing God's work well, what I'm out there doing is I'm helping others. I'm showing others how to get to this place in their spiritual development with the tools that I have, right? I'm not an expert. I'm not sitting in here trying to act like I'm some expert on this stuff. To be honest with you guys, my first trip in AA when I was 22 years old, I went through the steps one time, had a barn-burning spiritual experience, and kind of just did this. Well, that was fun. Now let me go sit in discussion meetings and, I don't know, openly discuss whatever it is that I wanted to talk about. And something in my mixed up alcoholic mind, I guess I looked at the rooms of AA at the time and I thought, well, it seems to me that in order to recover from alcoholism, all you got to do is you go through the steps one time, you make, about half your amends, you give a phone call to your sponsor if you've really messed something up, right? A 10 step back then to me was like, I've blown a relationship up, I've been fired, I've been caught screaming at someone at the grocery store, and now I got to call my sponsor and tell him myself. And so, I didn't even know what the 11th step was. I honestly thought the 10th step was the 11th step back then. And you know what? It doesn't even matter because I wasn't even doing it. And so, when I'm standing there and I'm dying from the page 52, you often must be familiar with this spiritual malady. And to me, it's the first time that Bill connects our human experience, this horrifying psychic pain of being disconnected spiritually, and he uses the word bedevilments. And I love that because that's the first time when I was reading this book, I'm like, wait a minute. So my position as being sober, just physically sober from alcohol and attending meetings, ensures that if I'm not treating the real nature of my illness, that it's not if but when. When am I going to pick up a drink? Because I look back at that experience and I now know that just simply attending meetings of AA or CA will not treat my alcoholism. Now it'll set me in a place for a little while where I can bat the consequences off for a little bit, but eventually, if I'm trying to treat the real nature of my illness, which is spiritual, by just attending meetings, and I'm not working with other alcoholics and addicts, and I'm not doing a nightly review and a morning meditation, and I'm not actively practicing the 10 step, it's just a matter of time before I return to my solution. Because I don't know about you guys, but man, when I took my first drink at the age of 9, I just felt the sensation that I was alone and I didn't fit in and no one really understood me or liked me, and that stuff just fell right off of me in the basement of my parents' home. When I did my first line of cocaine at the age of 17, I remember thinking, first of all, where has this been for 16 years? Where this is the stuff, that's the connectivity right there. That's really what's been missing. And then I called the girl that I was dating and I was so excited about having done my first light of cocaine. It was almost like I was telling her, I passed the bar, or I got a, like I got into some job that I wanted to be in. And I remember she just burst into tears. Her heart was broken. And, I just walked right past that. You know how we are, our keen addict alcoholic mind. I'm thinking I got the magic formula for life. And she's going like, dude, you're about to burn it down and end up in a treatment center at some point or maybe dead. And I'm just like, oh, that's crazy. That's never going to happen to me. So thankfully, my early experience informed my later experience. And when I got back to this treatment center, after picking back up my first drink after 9 years of sobriety, sober, and then going right back to cocaine, within a 3 year period, I had significantly burned my life to the ground and then burned it through some more and then kind of sifted through the ashes. And I'm living in a cardboard box and I'm, kind of panhandling my way through the day. And there's a liquor store over here and there's a crack house over here. And then that's my daily life. It's like, I'm just living to survive. I got to get something in me because I'm shaking so bad. And as soon as I get that sweet spot, about halfway through that gallon of Popov vodka, now I got to get something to smoke or snort. And I'm passing out covered in my own urine and I'm coming to covered in vomit. And I'm just thinking, you know what? This is how life's going to go. And thank God for the grace and the mercy that our higher power shows to us. Because eventually I was to come to this truth, which is that this God of my understanding that I found as a result of being hopelessly defeated at the hands of alcohol and cocaine, this power loved me as much as I was out there on the streets panhandling, falling down on my face, drunk and high every day, as he does when I'm sitting here trying to help other alcoholics. And that kind of blew my mind. So I love what happened. When we're looking at the history again. So the work is helping others, and I'm going to be understanding, and I'm going to be effective. I love that in our history, when Bill and Bob, they're in Akron, right, and they've got to find another alcoholic to work with. They go to Akron City Hospital, and you guys will remember, some of you remember this story if you're kind of a history buff nerd like I am, and I'm not an expert, but Bill Dotson, they go see him, and on day 2. Bill's a little confused. What the heck is going on here? Why are these guys taking such an interest in me, right? He's at that place that they talk about in A Vision for You, right? He can't imagine life with or without, right? He's at the jumping off place. And luckily for us, God intervenes in the form of two men who for the first time ever, they've got that identification, right? Later, they asked Dr. Bob, well, what the heck did Bill Wilson say? I mean, what did he say that anyone else never said? And Dr. Bob said, well, for the first time ever, there was a living person that spoke to me out of his own experience about the horrors of alcoholism from actual experience, right? And they're doing that with Bill Dotson. And on the day two, they have him in this special room, and he's like, what's this all about? And they both look at him and they say, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. The patient becomes the doctor, right? Empowered with three things. They got a pretty clear understanding of the problem: physical allergy, mental obsession. They got a pretty good idea of what the solution is, even with the six tenets of the Oxford group, right? It's spiritual in nature. I've got no power. I got to get hooked up to power as quick as I can because this obsession is going to return. Stone cold sober, we're all going to make the most insane decision of our lives that we've ever made, is that I'm going to pick up my first bag or my first drink from a position of being sober, right? So they know they got a little window of time here. And later, what was to come out of this was they were to start to form the program of action. But, you see this on page 18, 1 hour, right? The book says, if I've got that understanding, right? Understanding of the problem, understanding of the solution, I got no axe to grind, no fees to pay, no lectures to be endured. Under such conditions, in a few hours, I can usually gain the entire confidence of another alcoholic or an addict, right? And then it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing is going to be accomplished. So I got to be able to talk about this mental obsession, how it warps the mind, the mental state preceding the first drink. I got to be able to effectively describe that. I got to talk about my insane obsession to try and control and enjoy my drinks and my drugs. I got to talk to this guy about stopping for periods of time, right? Who here has done this? Anyone ever done a geographic cure? Anyone ever dumped her or him and then got another her or him and thought, man, this is it. This is the thing. Or maybe I'm going to try transcendental meditation, or maybe I'm going to go back to that yoga class, or, I'm going to take better care of myself. I'm going to stop for a period of time. I'm going to put something in front of me, getting high and drunk again. And then every one of us has had the experience of how easily that is pushed aside. The book says it's an old threadbare idea that this time I'm going to handle myself differently. Failure of the kind of defense that stops me from putting my hand on a hot stove. And so I pick up again. And then it goes on to say sometimes we even reflect on the consequences. And even then that doesn't do it. And then we get this progression of the illness. I love the jaywalker story, right? That's a really good way in which I sit down with these new guys and I try and tell them about, man, this is the illustration of the progression, right? Is that when I'm 9 years old and I'm drinking for the first time in my parents' basement, I go into a blackout. And I'm 22 years old checking into a treatment center. Now I've crossed lines that I said I would never cross at the age of 10 or 11. I said there was things I would never do to do cocaine. I would never put myself in this situation. I would never do it. And then, I become a certified line pusher. I become a guy where you put a line in front of me, I cross my arms and I say, oh, gonna have to get better than that, bud. And I push that line. And then people go, okay, well, I guess we're gonna have to put this line in front of you. And I say, not a problem. Let me push right past that. So I'm unable to stop and stay stopped. And frothy emotional appeal at this point means nothing to me. You see, I've got a code of the streets that I exhibit when I'm out there running and gunning. Don't snitch, don't tell, say nothing, see nothing. But that code doesn't exist with my family. See, I'm the guy that's so hip, slick, and cool that I'll lie, cheat, and steal and manipulate my family right out of their hard-earned money, right out of their emotional security, right out of their mental stability, and I'll do it without thinking twice. And yet I'm out here talking about I'm some kind of hardcore street guy. Well, what does any good gangster do when all the chips are down and he's got nowhere else to go? He calls his mom. And luckily for me, my parents did not answer the phone, and there was no one on the other end of that line. 17 years ago when I got to this treatment center, there wasn't a person on the planet that had anything to do with me. And I'm starting to suffer from hepatitis C, and my teeth are starting to fall out, and I'm horrifying psychic pain. I've abandoned my children. I've abandoned my family. And I got a stack of Desire chips this big. And I couldn't surrender. And so thank God for the ability for someone to sit down and qualify me, right? Talk about the peculiar mental twist, the strange mental blank spot that prevents my willpower from keeping me sober, right? So when we talk about this spiritual power, this dilemma, this dying an alcoholic death or living on a spiritual basis. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is something funny that I think about us all the time. I think we are the people of two choices. We are not the people of three choices, right? There's two different times in the book where I'm given two very clear-cut choices. The first time I'm told that I can go on to the bitter end, blotting out the intolerable consciousness of my existence to the best of my ability. And maybe we all have experience with that in some form or fashion. And for me, it was kind of hard, sometimes out there on the streets, I'd get a scam together, I'd pull some big move off, right? And I've got everything I would possibly want to drink and everything I'd possibly want to snort and smoke and put in my arm, and I'm sitting there crying. Can't stop crying. This cocaine, this booze, it's not working, man. It's not having the same effect. Booze and cocaine used to do something for me. Now they're doing something to me, and I can't escape it. It's not working. So I can do that. Or I can come in here and I can surrender to my truth and I can live on this spiritual basis. But I love that the book says it's not easy alternatives to face, because that's true for me, man. If you look at my experience, the second time I'm at a treatment center, my actions were really showing, hey, you know what? Why don't you tell me more about this dying an alcoholic death? Because I by then I've been sitting in the rooms for AA for 9 years. I know how to I give great share. I mean, I'll share and people will cry, and it's kind of like a mic drop. And then I walk out of the room and I go hit on the newcomer girl and I drink the free coffee and then I leave. And to me, that was what AA was, right? And so to have the experience of being in that horrifying psychic pain of untreated alcoholism in the rooms of AA, dying in plain sight, and being too full of self, too full of fear to reach out and ask for help from another alcoholic. So I don't blame anything on Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a little line in Tradition 9, maybe you guys have seen this thing. It says, I'm going to try and do my best to quote it. It says, unless each AA member follows to the best of his or her ability the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, they almost certainly sign their own death warrant. My drunkenness, my disillusionment does not come in the form of a penalty from those in AA. It comes from my own personal disobedience to spiritual principles. Now that's a mic drop. So, I'm lucky. I get here 17 years ago and I get with these guys and they are just on fire for this thing. And I'm on fire. Maybe you guys have all been there, right? When you first have this experience with God and this revolutionary change in your way of living and thinking. Talks about on page 50, there's this group of people on page 50, it talks about in We Agnostics, it says there's people that have gained access to and believe in a power greater than themselves, right? As a result of admitting their total hopelessness, complete defeat at the hands of alcohol and cocaine. And then they take this course of action. Chuck Chamberlain used to talk about it as uncover, discover, and discarding, right? What's blocking me off? And I go out and then I start cleaning up the wreckage of this past. And what I've seen is that steps 1 through 11, it's really like, God help me, God help me, God help me. And by the time I get to step 12, it's like, God use me to help. Who will go? I will go. You see, the way this power came into me, there was nothing that you could stop me from carrying this message. Physically, you couldn't even stop me. I was so on fire. I was running around the rooms of AA. And unfortunately for me, I was beating people over the head with the big book. Anyone ever been through that period, right? Where you just, man, you know it. You finally got the solution and you got the page numbers and you can quote it and you're like, and you're not doing it right. And I remember I called Charlie up and I'm talking to him about this and he goes, Stephen, let me ask you something. How many people are coming up to you after this amazing share of yours at all these meetings and asking you to sponsor them? And I said, none. He goes, yeah, well, doesn't sound very understanding, doesn't sound very effective. So, it goes on to prove to me that some of these deeper issues, some of these 6 and 7, these core issues, right? This identification with this false sense of self, these incessant needs I have to get my pride met and my self-esteem through the approval of other people, lifelong journey, right? And so, back to the line. Mark used to talk about back to the line of the will, proper use of the will, back to the line, turn back to the line. So turns out for me, what I've seen in the book is that the line of the will is written on page, it's one of these pages where it says, My life depends upon my constant thought of others and how I may help meet their needs. So, so now that I've gained access to this power and I've taken this course of action, I've come to believe in step two, I've taken a certain attitude toward the power in step three. And I think we've looked at this a little bit. I don't know, maybe you guys have seen this on page 55. If you're ever wondering maybe what this attitude they're talking about on page 50 is, we think it's on page 55. It talks about sweeping away prejudice, right? One of the themes that we agnostics is prejudice, prejudice, prejudice. And so we're sweeping away that based on what? Based on the hopelessness of my condition and the testimony of recovered addicts and alcoholics who are standing in front of me as living embodiments of the fact that this works. Sometimes that alone is all the prejudice I need swept away. I start listening to y'all's stories. We sit down and identify, and I think, my God, the way this guy drank and used should be dead or locked up in prison. And so the living embodiment of the power of this program and the power of God working in and through this man helped sweep away my prejudice. And then I began to think honestly, because I love the fact that there are no doors here spiritually. We never even installed them. There never were any, right? The room of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive. It's open, we believe, to all men and women who, and here's the caveat, earnestly seek, right? I got to earnestly seek, search diligently within myself. It tells me with that attitude I can't fail. So I think that might be the attitude they're talking about. So this revolutionary change, what is it? Well, turns out that if I'm lit and I'm connected and I'm serving others, right? So as I get further in the inventory process and I start trying to become a demonstration of this program, it turns out that my self-importance starts to go down and my God consciousness starts to rise up. And when I'm tapped into this consciousness, as many of you know, there's this new power that I start to sense. There's a peace, right? I start to be okay in my own skin. We look at what the fifth step asks of us. Have I really been as humble as I needed to be? Have I really been entirely honest? Have I really looked at the fact that I've got a double life? And that double life, I'm here to tell y'all, that returns to us sober. Once I become disconnected from the power, those old stage characters, they start to speak to me again. You know how they sound. Hey, man, you don't need 5 service commitments a week. Hey, buddy, you know what? You don't need to sponsor 20 guys. How about just a couple solid dudes who don't need a lot of work, right? And these voices start to talk to me. And what's happening is that I'm allowing the gifts of this program, I'm allowing the gifts of this fellowship to pull me away from what it is that restored me to sanity, from what it is that gave me this life to begin with. And if I'm not careful, the first thing I do is lose my connection with my higher power. You talk to people who've gone out. Oftentimes they say to me, Stephen, the first thing I did is stop going to meetings. That was not my experience. The first thing I stopped doing was communicating with the power greater than myself. The first thing I stopped doing was seeking that consciousness in my waking life. The first thing I stopped doing was praying for knowledge of His will for me and the power to carry that out. And then the unraveling begins, right? I don't have time for meditation. Certainly not going to write a nightly review. I'm going to 10-step again, just from when I blow things up, right? I'll call and I'll tell myself, I've stopped making amends because I don't really want to pay the money back. I don't really want to undo those things. I don't even want to talk to those people, right? I'm going to make living amends, which means I'm going to live for myself, solely for myself, and screw those people. And so I slowly start to work my way out back and to where I'm no longer powerless over alcohol. And I look back at my experience, and that's where I'm at 9 years when I pick back up again. But in this 17-year period, I've had bouts of being completely unwilling. All right, I've been the guy that had to work real hard at surrendering. I'm not one of these guys that came in, had this barn burning spiritual experience, got linked up with Mark Houston, Charlie Parker, and stayed on the front lines this whole time. I'm a guy that's gone dark. I've gone dark a couple periods in this sobriety. And it's just by the grace of God. It's just by the grace of the man who's now my sponsor that, luckily when you become a member of a home group, when you start showing up and you start being shoulder to shoulder with some people on this common journey, Sometimes when you slip, God sends you an angel. And luckily for me, this guy pulled me aside at a certain point in this 17 years and said, listen, buddy, you're not the guy that gets away with doing nothing. You're not the guy who gets away with not doing morning meditation, nightly review, checking in with your sponsor, having a home group, having a position at the home group, being on the firing lines. You're the guy who picks up a bag of cocaine and a bottle of alcohol, and you end up in prison or dead. So let's get back in touch, right? Helping others is the foundation stone of our recovery, isn't it? So it starts with my foundation stone is absolute hopelessness, an entire capitulation, right? Deflation at depth. Then I put my cornerstone in place, right? Total willingness. God is everything or he's nothing, right? Standard gets a little higher just a few pages into We Agnostics. Okay? And then I come back in and I take this step. I take this third step. So my job then becomes I take my awakened spirit. I practice the 10 step throughout the day, nightly review in step 11, morning meditation. I stay in the place in my mind, body, and spirit to be of maximum helpfulness to others. I never hesitate to go anywhere if I can be helpful, right? We are supposed to visit sordid places. Sometimes I hear people go like, I don't want to go to this treatment center. That's a real junky place. And I'm like, man, you must not have heard what Dr. Silkworth told us. You must not have heard about being on the firing line because I was told that if with these motives, I will remain unharmed, right? The firing line, Dr. Silkworth talks about seeing the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children, solving of these problems in my waking and sleeping moments. That's what it means to be doing the work. God will keep me unharmed. That's a promise. But I do it all with the idea that, and I know y'all know this, I don't have the power to get anyone sober and I don't have the power to keep anyone sober. But I do need to adhere to what Bill Wilson asked us to do, to be a part of our chief responsibility. I need to be able, as a recovered member, to give a newcomer an adequate presentation of this program. And I need to be able to maintain this attitude. If this guy does nothing or argues, I do nothing but maintain my own sobriety. I am not chasing you down. I'm not going to beg you to write a fourth step. I'm not going to get on your butt every day about making your amends. To me, I'm supposed to lay this kit of spiritual tools at your feet. And if you're hopeless and desperate enough to take what it is we have to offer and you move forward in any way, then Bill tells me I'm to break my neck to help you. Talk about the 12 inconveniences on page 97. Has anyone ever read those? I made a page marker real quick. I love this. So as a byproduct of doing what this program asked me to do, on page 97, there's a whole list of things we call them the 12 inconveniences. Get a book out sometime and read them. They're really pretty cool. It's kind of like the side effects of being a soldier for God on the front lines. So I'm awake, I'm aware, and I'm conscious to the paradox of doing everything in my power, using the three languages of our text, language of the heart, to work towards doing my part to ease the suffering of the alcoholic and addict, while at the same time knowing that in and of myself, I don't have the power to do so. So I love this line on page 161. I'll wrap up with this. I do ask God every morning what I can do in my morning meditation to help the person who's still suffering, right? And I do pray only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And as a result of that, some days, and you guys know what I'm talking about, some days I really do feel like a demonstration of God working in and through me to help other people. And on those days, I really feel like a member of good standing in this program. So I want to thank you guys for letting me come out. I hope I didn't go over too long in time. It's been a pleasure to speak with y'all today.